Welcome to Class 75, The Ministry and Works of Abdu'l-Baha. Tonight we will be talking about the major sections in the Ministry of Abdu'l-Baha. We won't be going into great detail, but there are 4 or 5 specific areas of endeavor in addition to the constant and ceaseless communication of Abdu'l-Baha with the Baha'i communities that existed at the time, training them on how to consult and solve problems and teach the faith. So we begin with what is the same beautiful picture that we ended with last time, a picture of Abdu'l-Baha holding the prayer beads. And we go to a statement made by Abdu'l-Baha about the title he chose for himself. Again, I repeat what we discussed at length last time, and that was he was being portrayed as aspiring to be or claiming to be on the same level with Baha'u'llah, to be a manifestation of God, and to make it absolutely clear that he was a servant of Baha'u'llah and not co-equal. He chose the name Abdu'l-Baha, which means, as we said last time, Abdul, servant of Baha. So how can you be co-equal with someone to whom you are subservient? Effectively, it is more powerful for us and more familiar to us than his more lofty titles. And of course, Baha'u'llah had given him the title Agha, or Master, from the time he was a child, and no one else had that title. This wasn't a common title. The mystery of God and so on were of his other lofty titles. And so he made this statement in defiance of those who were claiming that he was portraying himself as a manifestation. My name is Abdu'l-Baha, my qualification is Abdu'l-Baha, my reality is Abdu'l-Baha, my praise is Abdu'l-Baha. Thraldom to the blessed perfection is my glorious and refulgent diadem, and servitude to the human race my perpetual religion. No name, no title, no mention, no commendation have I, nor will ever have, except Abdu'l-Baha. This is my longing, this is my greatest yearning, this is my eternal life, this is my everlasting glory. Just beautiful, beautiful poetic phrasing of this claim. So we begin by my sharing with you, and these are, of course, all available online on the Baha'i reference site. Some first works about Abdu'l-Baha, biographies of Abdu'l-Baha, the most prominent of which, or the first of which, is Abdu'l-Baha, Center of the Covenant by Hassan Balyuzi, Hand of the Cause Balyuzi, who was a wonderful historian for the faith, 1971. Vignettes from the life of Abdu'l-Baha, which is a rather slim but just lovely collection of anecdotes from the life of Baha'u'llah, some of which are touching, some of which are humorous, that show the breadth of his personality and how he exhorted people through his own example to follow his example, to be like him. The Portals to Freedom by Howard Colby Ives. Now, Howard Colby Ives was a minister who met Abdu'l-Baha and was totally transformed. And this is one of the more moving books that I have encountered, that gives you such an intimate portrait, not only of Abdu'l-Baha, but of the effect of being in his presence. And this is extremely well written, so I recommend it wholeheartedly. 10 Days in the Light of Akka, together with an early pilgrimage. These are brief books that tell about the experience of those very early pilgrims that we're going to talk about tonight, who were the first to meet Abdu'l-Baha, and what the effects were. They recount the exchanges between them and Abdu'l-Baha and what he said. And again, their experience of being enthralled with him and being empowered by him to go back and teach the faith. The Mystery of God, which is a collection of pictures and quotes put out by the Publishing Trust of India some time ago, 1971, but a lovely, lovely little book. I don't know if it's still available or not. Then books about the history of his ministry. And these are books that go into more detail about what we're going to cover in brief tonight. The first is God Passes By Shoghi Effendi, always the best place to go for your first look at any subject. But notice he devotes almost 100 pages of God Passes By to the ministry of Abdu'l-Baha. And so he focuses on the highlights of that ministry. So I would say this is the best first place to go. The Covenant of Baha'u'llah by Adib Tahirzadeh, that was published in 1992, is not just about the ministry of Abdu'l-Baha, but it's focuses on the covenant in great detail, and you get a very in-depth view of an understanding of the trials and tribulations that Abdu'l-Baha confronted with the covenant breakers and those who would try to usurp his authority and destroy his person. Child of the Covenant, but also by Adib Tahirzadeh, which came out in 2000. This is not about a person. The Child of the Covenant is the will and testament of Abdu'l-Baha, which has a most weighty influence on the evolution of the Baha'i administrative order, as we will discuss next class. On Abdu'l-Baha as architect of the Baha'i administrative order. This deals with the four major institutions that Abdu'l-Baha either created as part of the overarching administrative order designed by Baha'u'llah, or else defining how they are elected or appointed and what their parameters of their authority are. And then finally, unashamedly, I recommend Wikipedia, because the depiction of the administration and life of Abdu'l-Baha is well done, primarily because it's done by Baha'is, as you will see in the footnotes to the various parts of that discourse. So while for a long time Wikipedia was disdained, particularly by college professors who would get essays from students citing Wikipedia, and they would say, no, this is fluff, or this is not studious material. They wanted to go to primary sources rather than the secondary sources. But Wikipedia is actually, because it's in a constant state of refinement by those involved in the particular areas, is a decent portrayal of the administration of Abdu'l-Baha. Then the writings, the collections of the writings and talks. Now, Abdu'l-Baha wrote works himself, but of course, then there are collections of the talks he gave. Memorials of the Faithful is a work he wrote, and this was taken from talks he gave on Thursday nights at his home in Haifa about individual heroes and heroines in the Baha'i faith. His very long description of the life of Tahirih in that work is just superb. The Secret of Divine Civilization. This is a work he wrote during the life of Baha'u'llah, and he wrote it anonymously. And it's describing how you how you deal with the problems that Persia was facing and create a civilization based on principles of justice, equality, and it's as applicable today as it was when he wrote it. Some answered questions. These are a collection of talks put together by Laura Clifford Barney. It's the most recent publication or edition of it is in 2014, but it was originally done very early in the 1900s by Laura Clifford Barney. They were called sort of table talks, or the kind of thing. They were talks that he gave after dinner as they sat around the table in his home. The tablets of the divine plan. These are the tablets that Abdu'l-Baha, immediately prior to his passing, well, actually 1916, he began sending them over, but because of the First World War, he had to do it piecemeal on little postcards and so on. But now you can have access to these in full, and these are the beginnings of the teaching plans of the Baha'i faith. The will and testament of Abdu'l-Baha. I say various editions, I mean there are various editions of it. You can get it online. They're all the same. There's no difference in them. The selections from the writings of Abdu'l-Baha. This came out in 1978. This is a compilation made largely from, there was originally a 3-volume work of the writings of Abdu'l-Baha, but many of them, they could not find the original, and so only those that could be authoritatively discovered and translated were included in this volume. And then of course, there's a lot that hasn't been published yet that will be published. Paris Talks, or a collection of the talks he gave in Paris, the Promulgation of Universal Peace, collection of the talks he gave in the United States, the Foundations of World Unity, another collection of his talks, and The Light of the World, which just came out this last year, another collection of writings of Baha'u'llah, of Abdu'l-Baha. Tablet to Auguste Forel, which came out as a separate publication, as did the tablets to The Hague. Now, all of these are available online if you go to the Baha'i Reference Library, which is available to everyone. And you can download them in a Word file, or you can download them as a PDF file, or you can read them online. So one of the first things, besides meeting with these pilgrims, which we'll talk about in a minute, that he undertook at the instructions of Baha'u'llah. If you remember, a few classes ago, we talked about how Baha'u'llah went to Mount Carmel with Abdu'l-Baha and pointed out to him on the last trip where the remains of the Bab should be interred and where a shrine should be built. And so in 1898, again, this very early, 6 years after the passing of Baha'u'llah, Abdu'l-Baha instructed that the remains of the Bab be brought from their hiding place in Tehran to the Holy Land. In the 48 years since his martyrdom, the remains of the Bab had been secreted from a silk factory in Tabriz, then moved to Tehran, Isfahan, Kermanshah, Baghdad, and Damascus, Beirut, and finally to Akka. They were stored in the room under the floorboard in the room of the greatest holy leaf in the house of Abdullah Pasha until the shrine of the Bab was completed. And the house of Abdullah Pasha was is in Akka. I say was, it's still there and has been refurbished, and now pilgrims can visit it. So the first Western pilgrims came, as I said, in 1898. They started coming to Akka on pilgrimage to visit Abdu'l-Baha. This group of pilgrims included Phoebe Hearst, who was a very wealthy woman who was the mother of William Randolph Hearst, the newspaper magnate. on whose life the work Citizen Kane was based, was the first that Baha'is raised, first time Baha'is raised up in the West had met Abdu'l-Baha. The first group arrived in 1898, and throughout late 1898 and to early 1899, Western Baha'is sporadically visited Abdu'l-Baha. The group was relatively young, containing mainly women from high American society in their 20s. But then, and this is a picture of one of this early group. This is Mason Remy as a young man. This is Laura Clifford Barney, who collected the table talks for Some Answered Questions. This is her husband. And this is Shoghi Effendi at about 4 years old, or 3 years old. But this caused more problems because the government began to notice that, why were these people coming all this way, these wealthy people in particular, people of note, to visit Abdu'l-Baha, and they became suspicious. The group of Westerners aroused suspicion for the authorities, and consequently Abdu'l-Baha's confinement was tightened. Now, he's still a prisoner, remember. He's a prisoner of the Ottoman Empire because this is prior to World War I. During the next decade, Abdu'l-Baha would be in constant communication with Baha'is around the world, helping them to teach the religion. The group included May Ellis Bowles in Paris, Englishman Thomas Breakwell, American Herbert Hopper, French Hippolyte Dreyfus, Susan Moody, Louis Getzinger, American Laura Clifford Barney. And of course, it was she, as I just said, that went on to compile these Some Answered Questions. From 1901 to 1912, this gets back to the Shrine of the Bab, he began building the shrine. From 1902 to 1904, in addition to building the Shrine of the Bab that Abdu'l-Baha was directing, he started to put into execution 2 different projects. The restoration of the House of Bab in Shiraz, and that's, of course, where the Bab proclaimed himself to Mullah Hussein, Iran, and the construction of the first Baha'i house of worship in Ishkabad, Turkmenistan. And of course, at that time, it was part of Persia, and that was the first Baha'i house of worship. It was destroyed later by the Persian government. It was destroyed partially by an earthquake, and then the Persian government had it destroyed completely. Abdu'l-Baha asked Aka Mirza Aka to coordinate the work on the House of the Bab so that the House of the Bab would be restored to the state that it was in at the time of the Bab's declaration to Mullah Hussein in 1844. Now, the spread of the faith in America, you have a strange thing that happens with the Baha'i faith and other religions as well. And I've mentioned it before, but I'll mention it again. When people become Baha'is through you, you may be tempted to think there's something wonderful about you, when in truth, if you teach well, you are merely a conduit through which people gain access to the writings of Baha'u'llah and to Baha'u'llah and to the Baha'i faith itself. And so what they're in love with is the spirit of the faith and the logic of the faith conveyed by you. But with several teachers, prominent teachers, they became, if you will, enthralled with themselves, thinking that they were the source of this power. And so one of these individuals is a very intriguing man, Ibrahim George Kirala, who was born in 1849 and died in 1929. He became a Baha'i in 1889, and he came to the United States in 1892 to join another Baha'i, Anton Haddad, who was one of the first Baha'is to go to the United States to teach classes. And he taught classes in Chicago. Now, some of the first places where you had a large group of Baha'is were in Chicago, and Kenosha, Wisconsin was another a very prominent place. But suffice it to say, he was the source of bringing in to the faith a number of prominent Baha'is. including Thornton Chase, who was designated by Abdu'l-Baha as the first Baha'i in America, Howard McNutt, who was the one compiled the talks of Abdu'l-Baha called The Promulgation of Universal Peace, Louis Getzinger, whom Abdu'l-Baha designated as the mother teacher of the West. And don't forget that most of the most prominent teachers in the early part of the faith in the West are women. So at the time, prior to the problems he encountered, that is Kerala, he was praised by Abdu'l-Baha for his teaching, and he was called Baha's Peter, among other laudatory titles that with which Abdu'l-Baha addressed him. And this is a picture you can see as a very handsome man, a very appealing individual. But unfortunately, as I say, he began to believe that he must have the same power as Abdu'l-Baha. And so I'm going to read you this brief description of it, what happened to him. But at one point, he went so far as to say that Abdu'l-Baha should be head of the faith in the East and that he would be head of the faith in the West, in America. That's how far it got. He also did some very mischievous and ignoble things, such as trying to convince Phoebe Hearst that he was building a hospital on Mount Carmel and that she should contribute funds. And he took money from her under that pretense. In 1898, Kerala undertook a Baha'i pilgrimage to Palestine to meet Abdu'l-Baha with other American pilgrims, including Phoebe Hearst, Louis Getzinger, and May Bowles. Now, in Akka, Kerala witnessed firsthand the conflict between Abdu'l-Baha and his brothers. Now, this is the conflict between Abdu'l-Baha and Mirza Muhammad Ali, who was trying to usurp the authority of Abdu'l-Baha, as you know. Upon his return to America in 1899, Kerala began to announce his avowed leadership of Western Baha'is independent of Abdu'l-Baha, and authored a book, Baha'u'llah, wherein he states his belief that Abdu'l-Baha was equal in rank to his brothers Mirza Muhammad Ali, Dayallah, and Badiullah. In other words, he wasn't superior to. And of course, in the will and testament of Baha'u'llah, Abdu'l-Baha is very specifically appointed as the one in authority. And so in effect, he sided with the Mirza Muhammad Ali. Early after the return to America, Abdu'l-Baha sent first Anton Haddad with a letter contesting the definition of leadership, then Kerala, initial teacher of the religion, Abdul Karim Tarani, to confront him. The conflict made the newspapers. And of course, as much as possible when these conflicts arise, whether with the conflict between Baha'u'llah and Mirza Yahya, or between Abdu'l-Baha and Mirza Muhammad Ali, they try as much as possible to not broadcast it and not make it public, so that the conflict can be dealt with firsthand. Ultimately, in the conflict between Abdu'l-Baha and Mirza Muhammad Ali, Kerala sided with the latter, for which he was declared a covenant breaker. This is a picture of Phoebe Hearst, as I say, mother of William Randolph Hearst, lovely woman, and became a Baha'i, though she was much undone by the corruption of Kerala. Hearst was raised, this is a brief description of how she became a Baha'i. Hearst was raised a member of the Christian Cumberland Presbyterian community in the 1840s. In 1898, she declared her belief in the Baha'i faith and helped play a key role in the spread of the religion in the United States. Hearst had already been an early investor in the initiative of Sarah Farmer, using the Greenacre Inn as a summer center of cross-religion gatherings and cultural development shortly after the 1893 Parliament of Religions. Now, that's a whole nother story, and that is Greenacre, which still today is a Baha'i school, and of course the Sarah Farmer Inn has now been thoroughly renovated. It looks exactly as it did, only it's been refurbished and so on. And if you haven't been there, you should go there. So Sarah Farmer's life story is another wonderful story. And you can see here Phoebe Hearst contributed monies to investing in these meetings that Sarah Farmer held before she became a Baha'i, inviting people like Emerson and other of those who were either abolitionists or those who sought world peace. She stopped on her way to Palestine and was shocked to see May Bowles, later May Maxwell, as is the mother of Ruhia Khanum, later a well-known American member of the Baha'i faith, bedridden with the chronic malady with which she had been afflicted. Hearst invited Bowles to travel to Palestine with her, believing that the change of air would be conducive to her health. Getzinger disclosed to Bowles the purpose of the journey, a pilgrimage to visit the then head of the Baha'i faith, Abdu'l-Baha. The group traveled to Akka and Haifa in Ottoman Palestine on pilgrimage, arriving December 14th, 1898. So these two things, really these three things are going on at this point then, if we're reviewing the ministry. First, getting the remains of the Bab moved to Akka, building the shrine of the Bab. The remains had not been interred yet. Dealing with the first pilgrims who came, and then dealing with the problems that arose out of Kerala's disaffection in America. They were the very first Westerners to make pilgrimage and meet Abdu'l-Baha. Hearst later wrote, "Those 3 days were the most memorable days of my life. Yet after the first pilgrimage attempts at correspondence on behalf of Hearst by Louis Getzinger were leaked, naming her involvement in the religion at the time of rising considerations of her son's political activities, her son being William Randolph Hearst. So Hearst dismissed the Getzingers from their stay at her home in 1901. Still in the spring of 1901, Hearst also met with Sarah Farmer again and invested again in Greenacre, as it came to be called. In 1902, and further, an agent of Hearst acted for Sarah Farmer when she changed her will in 1909 to bequeath Greenacre to the Baha'is in the event of Farmer's death. Hearst had also been a victim of an incident seeking to extort money from her, and I've already told you about that, which had caused her estrangement from some Baha'is. And you can imagine how that affected her. In October 1912, she invited Abdu'l-Baha, who was traveling through the United States, to stay at her home for a long weekend, even though at that time she had become estranged from the Baha'i community. During his stay, Abdu'l-Baha mentioned that anyone who tried to extort money or goods from others should not be considered a true Baha'i. So then we come to the conclusion of the events concerning moving the remains of the Bab and then the interment of the Bab. And there's a long description of this in God Passes By. It's very beautiful and you should read it. It took almost 8 years before Abdu'l-Baha was able to arrange the transfer of the remains of the Bab from Akka, to Akka. The casket containing the sacred remains arrived in Akka on 31st of January, 1899. 10 years later, on Nowruz 1909, Abdu'l-Baha, with his own hands and in the presence of believers from East and West, placed the wooden casket inside a marble sarcophagus, which was lowered into the vault built especially for it inside one of the 6 rooms constructed by Abdu'l-Baha for this purpose. In a tablet, he conveyed this good news to the believers in these words: "The most joyful tidings is this, that the holy, the luminous body of the Bab, having for 60 years been transferred from place to place by reason of the ascendancy of the enemy and from fear of the malevolent, and having known neither rest nor tranquility, has through the mercy of the Abha beauty been ceremoniously deposited on the day of Nowruz within the sacred casket in the exalted shrine on Mount Carmel. By a strange coincidence, on that same day of Nowruz, a cablegram was received from Chicago announcing that the believers in each of the American centers, and that is each center where there was a local assembly, had elected a delegate and sent to that city, and definitely decided on the site and construction of the Mashriq al-Azkar. Now, Mashriq al-Azkar means the dawning place of the mention of God, but it's a Baha'i temple, a Baha'i house of worship. And so at the same time, he received word that the first Baha'i temple community or Baha'i temple organization, which he used in advising them how to meet and how to make decisions about building the house of worship, which took 40 years to complete, and is now that beautiful edifice in Evanston and Wilmette, Illinois. He used the training of them on meeting, how they should meet, how they should elect delegates, to really train the first National Spiritual Assembly. This is what the shrine looked like. Now here you can see, as I've said before, there are only 6 rooms in it at this point. And you've got 3 rooms across here and then 3 rooms on the back. And then Shoghi Effendi added 3 rooms in the back, so it has 9 rooms. And the vault containing the sarcophagus of the Bab is in the middle of what is the center room. So this is what it looked like from what became known as Baha'i Street, but the Baha'is pleaded with the government to change that. They felt it was not appropriate. So you see how sparse and rocky and barren the mountain is. And here, right here, you can see, excuse me, is the Shrine of the Bab right here. That same building then became encapsulated by the superstructure that the Guardian with helped guide William Sutherland Maxwell, became the husband of May Bowles, to construct. He was the architect from Quebec who designed the Frontenac Hotel in Quebec City. 1911, now we're getting into another stage. You have the freedom of Abdu'l-Baha as a result of the Young Turks rebellion, which overthrows the Ottoman Empire. And so he is no longer a prisoner of the Ottoman Empire, which was in effect the Sultanate, a religious group. And you have the beginning of Turkey. In 1908, Young Turks revolution freed all political prisoners in the Ottoman Empire, and Abdu'l-Baha was freed from imprisonment. His first action after his freedom was to visit the shrine of Baha'u'llah in Bachi, while Abdu'l-Baha continued to live in Akka immediately following the revolution. He soon moved to live in Haifa near the shrine of the Bab. In 1910, with the freedom to leave the country, he embarked on a 3-year journey to Egypt, Europe, and North America. So this is the sort of a third section, if you will, or a third aspect of the administration of Abdu'l-Baha, where he goes to visit and strengthen and consolidate these, the Baha'i institutions in Paris and in England, and then in the United States. Excuse me, let me have a sip of my tea. From August, December 1911, Abdu'l-Baha visited cities in Europe, including London, Bristol, and Paris. The purpose of these trips was to support the Baha'i communities in the West and to further spread his father's teachings. In 1912, Abdu'l-Baha undertook a much more extensive journey to the United States and Canada. He arrived in New York City on the 11th of April, 1912, after declining an offer of passage on the RMS Titanic, telling the Baha'i believers instead to donate this to charity. He instead traveled on a slower craft, the RMS Cedric, and cited preference of a longer sea journey as the reason. Of course, there may have been a more spiritual reason. After hearing of the Titanic sinking in 16th of April, he was quoted as saying, "I was asked to sail upon the Titanic, but my heart did not prompt me to do so." While he spent most of his time in New York, he visited Chicago, Cleveland, Pittsburgh, Washington, D.C., Boston, and Philadelphia. In the August of the same year, he started a more extensive journey to places including New Hampshire, the Green Acre School in Maine, and Montreal, his only visit to Canada. He then traveled west to Minneapolis, San Francisco, Stanford, and Los Angeles before starting to return east at the end of October on the 5th of December, 1912. On the 5th of December, 1912, he set sail to Europe. Now we come to the third, the next section of his ministry. And this is, and of course, all this time he's writing to the Baha'i communities all over the world. So, I mean, that part of his administrative guidance never ceases. And he's writing, those of you who've read about the guidance about consultation and how to run the local spiritual assemblies, and you notice how many of those passages are from the writings of Abdu'l-Baha. So he's writing those all the time. So he's in constant communication with the Baha'is around the world. So don't think that these highlights are what occupies his daily affairs. He's doing something every day insofar as writing and so on. Of course, one of the main things is, when we've talked about this before, is that he had never given a public talk in his life. And he gave literally hundreds of talks as he traveled into Paris and to London and to the United States. Every day, I think he averaged a couple of talks or 3 talks a day. During the World War, then, what happened? Because, all right, he's back in the Holy Land now, and World War I breaks out. Abdu'l-Baha stayed in Palestine and was unable to travel. He carried on a limited correspondence, which included the tablets of the divine plan that he began to send in 1916, a collection of 14 letters addressed to the Baha'is of North America, later described as one of the 3 charter documents of the Baha'i faith. The letters assign the leadership role for the North American Baha'is in spreading the religion around the planet. Haifa was under real threat of Allied bombardment, enough that Abdu'l-Baha and other Baha'is temporarily retreated to the hills east of Akka. And this is one is in the village east of Akka, and others went on the other side of the Sea of Galilee, which is really a lake, and established the little village of Adasiya, where they grew crops and so on. Abdu'l-Baha was also under threats from the Simal Pasan, the Ottoman military chief who at one point expressed his desire to crucify him and destroy Baha'i properties in Palestine. The surprisingly swift Megiddo offense of the British General Allenby swept away the Turkish forces in Palestine before harm was done to the Baha'is, and the war was over in less than 2 months. And Allenby received a message, I think it was let me not get into those much details, but at any rate, to be sure and free Abdu'l-Baha. This was one of his objectives. Now, during the war, Abdu'l-Baha had the Baha'is grow crops to feed not only themselves, but the population in Akka. The war was also left the region in famine. In 1901, Abdu'l-Baha had purchased about 1,704 acres of scrubland near the Jordan River. And that's in Adasiya, but there's also some of it is on the eastern banks of the Sea of Galilee. And by 1907, many Baha'is from Iran had begun sharecropping on the land. Abdu'l-Baha received between 20 and 33% of their harvest, or cash equivalent, which was shipped to Haifa. With the war still raging in 1917, Abdu'l-Baha received a large amount of wheat from the crops and also bought other available wheat and shipped it all back to Haifa. The wheat arrived just after the British captured Palestine, and as such was allowed to be widely distributed to allay the famine. For this service, and not many people know this, for this service in averting a famine in North Palestine, he received the honor of Knight Commander of the Order of the British Empire at a ceremony held in his honor at the home of British Governor on the 27th of April, 1920. Now, he's very old at this point. This is the year before he dies. He was later visited by General Allenby, King Faisal, later King of Iraq, Herbert Samuel, the High Commissioner for Palestine, and Ronald Storrs. And this is a picture, and you can see how aged he looks. He died, I believe he was 76 years old. Well, he's born in 1844, so you can do the math. But this is where he is being knighted. So he was Sir Abdu'l-Baha. This is a picture also during this latter period with some of the pilgrims from the East and the West assembled around Abdu'l-Baha. Now, we go now to the passing of Abdu'l-Baha. At the close of his strenuous Western tours, which had called forth the last ounce of his ebbing strength, he had written, "Friends, the time is coming when I shall no longer be with you. I have done all that could be done. I have served the cause of Baha'u'llah to the utmost of my ability. I have labored night and day all the years of my life. Oh, how I long to see the believers shouldering the responsibilities of the cause. My days are numbered, and save these three remains none other. Save this, there remains none other joy for me." Several years before he had alluded to his passing, "O ye my faithful loved ones, should at any time afflicting events come to pass in the Holy Land, never feel disturbed or agitated. Fear not, neither grieve. For whatsoever thing happeneth will cause the word of God to be exalted and his divine fragrances to be diffused." And of course, some of the things he was foreseeing were the war in Palestine, the war that led to the establishment of the state of Israel in 1948, and then the subsequent wars between Israel and the various Arab countries. Again and again, remember whether or not I be on earth, my presence will be with you always. Regard not the person of Abdu'l-Baha. He thus counseled his friends in one of his last tablets, for he will eventually take his leave of you all. Nay, fix your gaze upon the word of God. The loved ones of God must arise with such steadfastness that should in one moment hundreds of souls, even as Abdu'l-Baha himself, be made a target for the darks of woe, nothing whatsoever shall affect or lessen their service to the cause of God. And of course, that happened as well. A month before his death, which occurred on the 78th year of his age, I think it was Baha'u'llah who lived to be 76, in the early hours of the 28th of November, 1921, he had referred expressly to it in some words of cheer and comfort that he addressed to a believer who was mourning the loss of his brother. And about two weeks before his passing, he had spoken to his faithful gardener in a manner that clearly indicated he knew his end to be nigh. "I am so fatigued," he observed to him. "The hour is come when I must leave everything and take my flight. I am too weary to walk." He added, "It was during the closing days of the Blessed Beauty, when I was engaged in gathering his papers, which were strewn over the sofa in his writing chamber in Bachi, that he turned to me and said, 'It is no use to gather them. I must leave them and flee away. I also have finished my work. I can do nothing more. Therefore must I leave it and take my departure.'" And then I'm going to close with this passage, which is not from the period when he died, but this is from the last page, or one of the last pages of An Early Pilgrimage by May Maxwell. Another commandment, and this is a very well-known passage. Another commandment I give unto you. And it's a farewell to these early pilgrims then, okay? And so he's telling them the following. Another commandment I give unto you, that ye love one another even as I love you. Great mercy and blessings are promised to the peoples of your land, but on one condition, that their hearts are filled with the fire of love, that they live in perfect kindness and harmony, like one soul in different bodies. If they fail in this condition, the great blessings will be deferred. Never forget this. Look at one another with the eyes of perfection. Look at me, follow me, be as I am. Take no thought for yourselves or your lives, whether you eat or whether we sleep, whether we are comfortable, whether we are well or ill, whether we are with friends or foes, whether you receive praise or blame. For all of these things, we must not care at all. Look at me and be as I am. You must die to yourselves and to the world. So shall ye be born again and enter the kingdom of heaven. Behold a candle, how it gives its light. It weeps its life away drop by drop in order to give forth its flame of light. All right, this is the picture of the casket of Baha'u'llah, of Abdu'l-Baha, being carried by all the peoples of Haifa. He was much known and celebrated. This, of course, is the house of Abdu'l-Baha here, which is still there and available. And this is the Mediterranean Sea out here. And then my voice is gone, so I'm not going to try to read this, but I will include it. These are comments by others made at his funeral. And so that's it for tonight. Let me stop sharing and take some tea. And you may unmute yourselves if you wish and ask any questions or share any comments or thoughts you have. So is there anyone who has something they wish to share? Just put it in the chat, or if you want to unmute yourself, you can ask it in person. Alex is still not here because he's still dealing with his young week or 2 week year old daughter. Anything at all? Let me see. Have I made it so you can unmute yourself?
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Hatcher.
You're very welcome. Okay, let me see. Chat. I think I've got it right. Let me see. Ask all to unmute. Allow. Okay, so you can unmute yourselves as you wish. So any comments or questions? Again, this was such a brief treatment of such an important period. So, but as I said, it's so much, it's done so much better and more completely in these works that I recommended that I really feel it would not be of much service for me to try to summarize it for you, because I summarized it for you, but you really need to see the details of how all these events play out, you know, particularly the consternation that was caused in America when you had these covenant breakers and so on. And of course, we're going to see the same thing occur with the death of Abdu'l-Baha insofar as the transition to the guardian. Okay, well, folks.
Dr. Hatcher?
Yes.
I want to thank you for showing the pictures of Abdu'l-Baha, the beautiful one when he was holding the beads, and when he was knighted. It was very emotional. And his casket, that was very, very emotional. And I want to thank you very much for that.
You're very welcome. And if you know how, you, of course, this will be available online if you want to download the slides. Again, I remind you all that if you want there is a Baha'i media site if you want to see pictures relating to the Baha'i faith and the Baha'i buildings and so on. And also, if you simply go online, as I say, and write in Google or some other browsers, you know, pictures of Abdu'l-Baha and so on, you'll find many of these. But yes, it's incredible. You know, sometimes we feel like, well, they must be being hyperbolic when they talk about that all the city, you know, arose to usher the casket of Abdu'l-Baha up the hill to where it was interred in the shrine of the Baha, because that's a pretty long walk. As those of you who made it, you know, it's a pretty hard walk, and they all carried his casket up so lovingly and so on. All right. Anything else before we go?
Yes, Dr. Hatcher, I just wanted to mention there is a beautiful book about Khairullah and also Phoebe Hearst and their pilgrimage. It's called Lightening the Western Sky.
Oh, yes.
Beautiful book.
Yes, that's by
Catherine Jewett Hoganson.
yes, she lives. In fact, she lives right across the bay in Tarpon Springs or Newport Richey, I forget which. But yeah, and she's doing one on Horace Holly now, a book on Horace Holly, which I look forward to.
Yes.
All right, friends. Well, have a good evening.
Sorry, Dr. Hatcher. Can I ask a question about Phoebe Hearst's son? Did he ever have anything to do with the faith or at all his knowledge or anything?
Did he?
And Phoebe Hearst's son, yes.
His son was, I don't know if you've seen the movie Citizen Kane, but it's a very accurate portrayal of his life. He was, if I can just summarize it in a sentence or two, he was a philanderer. He was power-seeking, narcissist maniac. He was not a nice person.
Who was this one?
This is William Randolph Hearst of the Hearst newspaper thing. So I'm sure, again, simply go on Wikipedia and you can get a good outline of his life. But if you haven't seen Citizen Kane, you should see it. It was an incredible, incredible movie, and it's very moving piece of work. Orson Welles plays him, and Orson Welles. Yeah, Orson Welles, I think, wrote it and directed it and did everything. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you very much.
So, Mrs. Hearst herself, so did she not stay a Baha'i? Because I didn't know that she
well, as you can tell, that kind of ruined her relationship with the faith in a formal sense. But obviously, you know, I'm sure she's doing fine. If you get my drift, I'm sure she. All right.
Thank you.
But I mean, that was, you can imagine how that, I mean, this individual who was, a teacher who had taught all of these luminary Baha'is, and it's a hard thing, but it's not unusual, as I say. You have this with Joel Marangello, who was sort of the force behind the Mason Remy's defection. You have this with a number of individuals whose history I know about, who were great teachers, but who began to believe that, as I say, that the force, the power was within them and not being channeled through them. It's a great temptation to think, oh, gee, I must be great here. So, at any rate, all right. Good night, dear friends.
Thank
Thank
you.
you very much, Dr. Hatcher. Good
All
night.
right.
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. I love